I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. It was the committee members' wish to explore the ALICE levels in North Frederick County a little bit more so that we could understand and get the word out, since we have a huge population of people in our town who are in that percentage of people, so that as we're making decisions, as we go forth as a board, we understand what we're working with. So I'd like to introduce Malcolm Fergol of the United Way of Frederick County, and he'll be presenting, and then we'll have a session where we can ask questions and get some more information. Okay, thank you.
So is the mic on right now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. You can hear me. And thank you very much, Liz, for that introduction. I appreciate that. And as Liz said, my name is Malcolm Fergol. I'm the Director of Community Impact at United Way of Frederick County. Does everyone have the one-pager we gave out? Great, as you got in the room. So, and I think I left my remote up there. So Liz is about to bring it up here. Hey there, what? Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to go over the ALICE report today, as Liz mentioned. And can I just see a quick show of hands for those who are already familiar with the ALICE report? So about a quarter to a third of you guys. That's great. And I'm going to go over some basic details of it, though, to make sure everyone understands the basic concepts. And we'll have time to get into questions. I'm definitely excited that I'm up here tonight in Emmitsburg to share this important information. So you'll see on the screen that ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. And it's a way of looking at the cost of living in our communities that we feel is more accurate and more localized than the federal poverty level. But we'll talk about that as well tonight. So you can see that OneMain Financial was our main state sponsor. They're a financial provider of businesses in the community. They were the main state sponsor, both for this report that came out, the update in the state last fall, but also for the first Maryland report that came out 2 years ago. So we want to thank them for their support. But you can see from this list that we have lots of local partners in our efforts sharing the ALICE report in Frederick County. United Way of Frederick County has really run with the ALICE report. It has become a main driver of our strategies on how to form community impact with our grant-making programs and other activities at the Financial Stability Prosperity Center, as well as working with our partners in government and nonprofits and business. So you can see a list of those there. I'm not going to name all of them in the interest of time tonight, but I will mention that the bolded ones on that list are ones that financially supported some new information and research that we just did recently and started to release the last month. That's a special report commissioned just for Frederick County and the city of Frederick. And that information is actually, Frederick County is the first county to ever do such a special report. So we're really excited about that. And those bolded organizations help support that, such as the city of Frederick, Frederick County government, as well as the Community Foundation and others. And we really gratefully appreciate their support. So again, don't have time to read through all their names tonight, but just wanted you to see that there. So what are we talking about? And I don't know if I want to, is it possible to, if I move this way, would that mess things up? You see what I'm saying? So that way people can kind of look in the same direction. This podium moves? Okay.
There's two things underneath it.
That may make it hard. Then maybe I'll just leave it and I'll pivot and I can do this and that magically works. So, is it all? That's all right. As you nod to sleep, I will speak softly to you. So here's the first part of the information we're going to look at. And you'll see there we're both talking about the federal poverty level and the ALICE survival threshold. And what we're seeing here is that there's a huge gap between what it takes to live, that's what we call the survival threshold or survival budget for a given household size, and that federal poverty level, which is determined at a national federal level. That is the same throughout all 48 continental states. So how do we get to these numbers? We're going to talk about that, but I just want to start off immediately by showing the gap there between those numbers. And one of the big reasons why several years ago the United Ways in New Jersey were motivated to finally work with the researchers at Rutgers University to come up with a more accurate portrayal of what it costs to live in our communities. So this This is the moment where we all silence our cell phones for further. I just silenced mine just a moment ago, so I was right there with you. We're going to start at the national level and work our way backwards to get to Emmitsburg. So we really appreciate that we have this data for the United States as well. We got this first last summer, and you can see that on the national level, and this is 2016 data. So all the data I'm going to talk about tonight is 2016 data. Let me just verify that and make sure you understand that. And you'll see here that for the number of households, 14% of all households in the United States of America were underneath the federal poverty level in their communities. Okay, and again, that's the same throughout all 48 continental states. There's a slight adjustment made for Alaska and Hawaii to be a little bit more. And then you'll see above that we have an additional 29% of households that are above the federal poverty level but below that ALICE survival threshold in their given communities. So that combines for 43% of all households in the United States are below the cost of living in their community, inclusive of the federal poverty level. So just want to keep that in mind, the national data points, because one of the things that we'll talk about tonight is that the challenges we're facing in Emmitsburg, the challenges we're facing in Frederick County, the challenges we're facing in Maryland are not isolated to us. There's folks throughout the country are working on this and dealing with this issue. So what is Maryland's basic cost of living as far as the average state survival budget? For a single individual, it's about $26,000. And again, that compares to that $11,500 you just saw for a single individual in the federal poverty level. And we had a family of four just under $70,000 a year. Those are the state averages. I had a question earlier tonight before we started about how do we figure out these numbers. We're going to dive really deeply in a moment into the ALICE survival budget to talk about how we got there. But to give you a very quick reminder on where the federal poverty level comes from, that is a formula looking at consumer prices and inflation and various economic factors. The basic formula for that, though, has not been altered since the 80s. So you can imagine there may be some room for improvement there. Especially, would you say that anything has changed economically since 1980s to today? I think a few things have changed. For one, a lot of people in the economy right now weren't even born when those formulas was put together. Now, of course, it's a formula, so there is some adjustment for passage over time and costs changing. But there's obviously a gap between the needs we're seeing in our community and the expressive growth of nonprofits to serve them with that federal poverty level, what that's telling us. And we'll talk more about that. Another thing to note is that it was only in the 80s, for example, that the federal government adjusted salaries for their employees throughout the country based on geographical cost of living, but they never got around to adjusting that for the federal poverty level. So just something to think about. So we're going to look really quickly at the state of Maryland overall. Oh, we have a question?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
That near $70,000 threshold.
Yeah,
Can you just kind of dive into that a little bit?
we're going to get there.
Yeah,
We're going to get there.
actually sounds kind of high.
So we're going to get there, and what you'll see is that's actually for Frederick County, that's lower than Frederick County's for a family of four, and we'll get to that. And you'll see that was actually we're going to spend most of our time there. I think we're about 1 or 2 slides away, and we're going to dive into that. But just quickly to give you an idea of where we are relatively to the rest of the state, because it's always helpful to see where you are in context, right? So you can see the state, more than 1 out of every 3 households are below that ALICE threshold. And what you can see here is the passage over time from 2010 to 2016. And you can see that most of these counties are getting, if not all of them actually, are getting darker. Howard County is the lowest in both reports. And Howard County is just over 20% of their households are underneath their ALICE threshold. And Somerset County in both is the highest for a county average. Over half of their county households are ALICE or below. So here's again how those counties rank in the state of Maryland. This is sorted from lowest ALICE percentage to highest, and these percentages are inclusive of the federal poverty level, so just keep that in mind as we're looking at these numbers. We can see Frederick's 90,000 households, 39% are ALICE or below.
Those are under the threshold.
That's right, under the threshold and including households under federal poverty level. So here, real quickly, is comparing the 2014 to 2016, some of the data points, and especially one of the things we want to talk about towards a little bit, and indirectly the question that was just brought up, is that it's not mutually exclusive to have both a thriving economy and a growing number of households who can't make ends meet. In fact, oftentimes that is what's driving that very situation in the economy we have today. You'll see that some of these numbers are really fantastic for Frederick County. You can see the median household income went from 84,000, already well above national average at the time, to 90,000, doing great there. Unemployment rate went down from 5% to 4%. It's hovering just over 3% now. Health insurance rate was already high, crept up a little higher, though that doesn't take into account those who are underinsured or those who may lack full comprehensive dental cover insurance for adults. In the state of Maryland, health insurance plans are only required to require cleanings for adults. Children's health insurance, though, in the state of Maryland is required to have comprehensive dental. The poverty rate, that's where we see some concern. We were staying flat from 2010 at 6% of households, but then you see the jump up to 8%. And as Wyatt can tell you in the back, he's been doing a lot of research on this himself, that number percentage seems to be creeping upwards towards 10% in the newest data we're seeing from 2018. The housing burden for renters is probably one of the biggest areas, though, of concern here. We have 44%, which is already pretty high compared to just over 20% of homeowners paying more than 30% of their income in 2014 there. But you can see that's about half of all renters when we get to 2016. And again, this is something we're seeing throughout the country. I was just on my drive up here listening to WAMU, and they were talking about housing issues and how this is happening throughout the country. Rents are very high. It's just something that's a trend that's being seen throughout the country at the moment, especially around any areas of population. So that's something to keep in mind too. So again, on some of these numbers, top three numbers look great, but then we dive into here that's a little bit concerning. Especially I think that housing burden for renters as far as the percentage of their monthly income. So what's our basic cost of living? And the next slide, I believe we're going to finally dive into how we come up with these numbers. This is again for a single adult, $35,000 a year compared to that $11,500 for federal poverty level as individual, and then $84,000 for a family of four in Frederick County compared to $24,000 for a family of four in the federal poverty level. Okay, so here's where we get to answer your question. And I just realized you pulled up a presentation, but I don't know if it was the one I wanted you to pull up. We never looked at it together. So I guess we're going to find out because there was a few PowerPoints on there. So we may have to switch to another one later because I'm not sure if this was the right one. But
I picked the top one.
was it the newest one? Did you sort by date? Okay, then we're probably good, but we'll find out. So because I do want to make sure this has some of the new information. Oh, well, I didn't touch it today, but we'll see what happens. So maybe someone else touched it. So yeah, it's one of my interns could be playing a practical joke on me. So this breaks it down at length. And so far, I think we're in the right place. So we'll see how it goes. And actually, let me just jump ahead so we don't waste time later. Because then I can see. Just pretend you're not seeing. Oh, good. Yeah, this is the new one. Okay. And you didn't see any of that. That didn't happen.
Spoiler.
So see who has a photographic memory here. And don't worry, we're not going to spend as much time as we're spending on every slide going forward. You can see there's a lot of data to unpack tonight. So let's dive into this. How the heck did we come up with this number, to your question? So this is how we did it. It's called a survival budget. It's meant to be paying your expenses, nothing more, nothing less. So there's no savings on here. There's no payment towards debt either, though, because this is imagining you're paying 100% of your bills every month. Housing includes utilities, and it is fairly market rate. And food, you can see there, I just want to point out, that does actually acknowledge that there's some access to and taking advantage of food banks and things like that. And why is that so with food and not with housing? Well, there, as Mark can tell you, Mark Long, that is, there's not an availability of affordable housing, but there is thankfully an availability of charity, of food banks and free food in the community. So much easier to get food than it is housing at an affordable price. Technology was a new item we added. That's paying just the monthly bill for a smartphone. So that's all that's paying for, not even paying to get you the smartphone itself or a contract fee to pay for that smartphone over time, but paying for that smartphone plan. And that's the lowest smartphone plans that are available at the time of the research from Consumer Reports. You can see, of course, we have our taxes and a miscellaneous. We cover things like clothing. If you have children, their activity fees, hopefully, sports participation, et cetera, after school activities, summer camp, et cetera. But we do have a separate childcare item for primary childcare. You can see that can be quite expensive. The main pain points we see for families working in this issue, both at the Prosperity Center, but also at our partner nonprofits and government are childcare, housing, and transportation. And why transportation in Frederick County? I really don't have to ask you guys this in Emmitsburg. But as we know, Frederick County being as large as it is and as spread out as it is, you have to have a car to effectively get around. There's not available public transportation, which is and it's challenging to implement that public transportation because of the great distances we're talking about between communities. So that's the highest transportation budget in Maryland in the survival threshold. So keep that in mind. Healthcare, this is not actually even paying for health insurance. This is just average out-of-pocket health costs for a family of that size. And also paying the penalty not to have health insurance. We've talked to the researchers about maybe adjusting this in the future because, as you saw, we have very, very high health insurance rates. But we also just wanted to make this as apolitical as possible, as conservative a budget as possible, so no one could try to say that any of these numbers were inflated. And I can say that once folks get to this slide and we go through it, we've had very little pushback, surprisingly, of over 2 years of giving these presentations from anybody about, is this actually what it takes to cost for this family size? One thing that you can think about is, well, maybe we're further away from the city, so our housing is cheaper. Well, but then your transportation costs are going to be higher. And actually, all your economic options are going to be limited. So that means you have less choice when you're going out to buy things because there's less stores. You can say, oh, well, the internet. Well, we know, too, in this communities that not everyone here has the internet. Not everyone has access to that. So what should be the great equalizer is actually another way we're dividing ourselves. So we definitely are excited that there's an increase in the rural internet broadband support from the federal government, and hopefully we'll see more of that connections happening here in Frederick County in more remote areas, because we do think internet is one of the ways people can equalize their economic situation.
Is that assuming that both adults work?
It's not assuming either. It could be any. It could be. That's a total salary you need for the household, whether or not it's one or two adults. So either one adult needs to make that, or a combination of the two. So that would be, therefore, a combination of their hourly wage, right? If they split it in half. So you can see that the individual hourly wage is about $17.66. I'll get right there, Liz. Just want to finish this thought before I forget it. Which, as you may know, is with all the debate going on in Maryland, this is higher than the proposed $15 minimum wage. But one thing I want to point out, if we had time, which we're not going to do tonight, but if you take that sheet of paper home with you, look at our website, unitedwayfrederick.org/Alice, or go to the Alice website, unitedwayalice.org, then you'll see that for some counties, their hourly wage survival budget is actually far less than $15 an hour because their cost of living is closer to the federal poverty level. Liz had a question.
We have a lot of single family parent homes with 2 or more children. How would that affect the?
Yeah, and we can show budgets for all kinds of different family sizes. And if we have time, I'm actually going to show you some things online. Maybe hop over there to drive a bit. But one of the things that it affects, obviously, is that you only have one potential income source. And so therefore, it's even harder to come up with that hourly wage you need or the annual total. One thing to keep in mind, and this is I don't want us to lose. It's not like the good news is voided by this news, okay? So it's great that there's access to jobs, right? So that's one of the things that we think is a real opportunity for Alice households in Frederick County. There are good paying jobs here, but maybe you have to get education to access to them. So one of the things we're encouraged by are programs like at Frederick Community College, a new program they're doing where they're supporting families by getting the adults back to school by giving them money to pay for childcare. And then helping them find a way to pay for the costs of the tuition if they need assistance. And that's fantastic because it's not just telling them that you have to use the childcare on campus. They're literally giving them the cash for them to choose where to get their kids to childcare. And that's really empowering those households to succeed in their education, which will then lead to better paying jobs. Because you can do it if you're a single parent, but you need to have, it's even more important that you have access to a good paying job to cover expenses. And the other thing I'd mention about that program, I think is fantastic, is it forms a cohort of those individuals. They have to go to at least one class together over the first year they're there, and so they form a community amongst each other and peer support, and that is so important to getting through because there's people dealing with the same challenges and hurdles, so they can understand each other and know where they're coming from. And then they say, well, maybe you can try this, or have you tried this resource? Did you know about that? And that's just so invaluable to folks, both single parents and married couples. or partners raising a child or children. So I think we've gone through. Yep, we've gone through all the items here. Any other questions on this though? Because this is who's first. You want to go first next? Taxes. Yeah. Yes. The idea would be that would be their total tax.
Sales and everything?
Yep. So, any other questions?
That was my question.
Okay. And there are some taxes, I would say, probably in other items. So, housing, for example, would include some of the taxes related to housing inside that. Not everything is cut out of the prospective budget bucket and put into taxes. But the idea is that this does, in total, cover their whole tax liability.
I'm assuming that
Yeah.
utilities, because everybody has to have.
That's in
part of
housing. That's part of housing. Yep.
So-
Was there another question over here?
Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
Does that housing, and I'm sorry, maybe you said this.
That's all right.
Does that assume rent?
No, it depends on the family size. Depends on the family size. So if you the full report is several over 100 pages. The update came out in the fall is over 50 pages, I think, for the state, and then the special report I mentioned is about just under 30 pages. And I'll tell you how to get to that before we finish tonight. But one thing I was going to say is that in there they explain for which household size is it a house versus rent. For most of them, I will say it is rent. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so for most of them, it's rent, so that means that housing for rental units is $1,600 a month?
So that's the
People
with 2 children, including utilities, including taxes.
And so then backing on up to this not being dependent on 1 or 2 workers for what it's worth. So
Sure.
both husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend could
Yeah.
be working, or partner, whatever. But in any event, so you're looking at childcare on top of the salaries one way or another. And there's some basic assumption this could be one income earner, right? And one stay-at-home person. Would that
Yeah.
necessarily allow for $1,490 in childcare?
Yeah, well, we've been.
On top of that? I mean, what,
Mhm.
if so, how does that happen?
Yeah. So looking
Where
at
do those costs come from?
Sure. The child care costs come from the Maryland Family Network, and these costs, when we compare them to, these are like incredibly low for full-time child care costs. It's assuming them possibly not even fully licensed child care, definitely in-home care in a neighborhood. So it's already very low. Now, of course, and that's something we say, there's no way any budget we come up with can account for every single individual ramification of a family situation or household situations. There's no way you can do that. But the best effort has been made here to approximate most situations. So you're right. There should be some families that have flexibility of their job, which allows them to maybe cover childcare part-time so they can maybe they have mom living next door. So there's lots of ways that this could be very different for folks. But the point is that we can't also assume that all those opportunities are available to everybody. So that's why we had to come up with something that applied to most situations. And one of the things that we found, if you follow the population changes, not just for Frederick County, but for Maryland, there's been a lot of population movement towards areas of jobs. So there's a lot of people here in Frederick County who don't have extended family nearby, who don't have that support network. And if they don't live in the city, they may not even have that many people living close by, period. And if they have any problems with their car, then so on and so forth. But this, from everyone we've talked to, that is a very low monthly child care cost. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that who's paying child care in the audience. But I will say we're encouraged by 2 factors. Remember, this is 2016 data. 2 things that happened in the last 2 years. One is last year, the state of Maryland increased the income threshold for qualifying for child care voucher support. So that's really good news because they saw the cost of living is increasing and they increased the different brackets in which you can qualify for child care voucher support. And that may not pay for all of it, but at least helps pay for some of it. And then this summer, the amount of that voucher will actually go up for each of those brackets. So those are 2 good things. And again, that would be not reflected in this data because this is 2016 data. So we're excited about how that will impact, say, the 2018 numbers and 2020 numbers, because we're committed to updating this every 2 years. That's our timetable. Liz? Yeah.
I was thinking we also have some additional challenges up in North Frederick County because there's no transportation, so people can't get to college.
Right.
to get the job
If they don't have a car, yep.
if they don't have a car,
Yep.
putting them into worse, which might explain.
Yeah, it's a real challenge if you don't have a car, obviously. And we know we recognize the price and costs of doing public transportation. And you'll see at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what the things we're doing proactively, because this is just data sharing, right? This is information education. One of the things that we've done is it's a primary part of our advocacy platform at United Way of Frederick County to support increased transportation options, whether it be buses or car share, or looking at expanding programs like Second Chances Garage. So there's more opportunities for subsidized car ownership. We definitely think there's a lot of options if we apply creativity and some resources to the challenge. Any other questions? This is again the heart of everything. So any other questions on this? And these are great questions, and I want to just restate what I said earlier towards the points about how these could change for different households. Every individual circumstances will always prevail. That there's always going to be different situations for each household, and that's something that we just got to remember. But we also want to try inform ourselves of, okay, for most situations, though, what's the general cost of living in the county, and what percentage of those households in our community are underneath that. So at least give us a basic idea, a starting point, if you will, and definitely a more accurate starting point, we feel, than the federal poverty level for the challenges we already discussed. So this defines some of the things I already talked about and gives some of the sources of information. So you can see up there, we have USDA information, HUD information, Consumer Expenditure Survey, consumer reports, as I mentioned, for the cell phone plan. A lot of this is actually, ironically, federal government data. So I can also tell you we rely heavily on the American Community Survey from the U.S. Department of Census for a lot of the information. Again, kind of ironic considering the challenges we're seeing with the federal poverty level data. But that's one of the reasons, and we'll talk about later, why, and I wanted to bring this up tonight as a big thing we want to work with Emmitsburg on, is a very accurate 2020 census count. Because without that accurate count, one, we'll have less federal support coming through to the state of Maryland and therefore to Frederick County for programs that folks do qualify for. And we will have less accurate information. So when we're trying to decide how to make decisions about policy or do work in our community, we won't have the accurate information if we don't have a complete account as possible. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is a visual representation of a lot we've already been talking about. My favorite part is the red line. That's the federal poverty level for each community for a family of 4. And you can see it's just a nice flat line because it doesn't change. It's the same in each community. This orange line is the ALICE survival budget for a family of 4 in each county. And you can see even just next door, a stark difference between Washington County and Frederick County, just over $60,000 a year to compare to that over $80,000 we were just looking at. You can see how Carroll County is lower than ours. Howard County is almost identical, just slightly a bit higher. But again, I think most people would think it's a lot higher considering how low their ALICE percentage is, but you also see their median household income is much bigger. So when you have higher incomes and you have more people, you have a bigger tax base. You have more options for which to pull upon to have public interventions or partnerships with public government and nonprofits. You see Montgomery County, actually a lower cost for that family of 4. They've much more bigger tax base, as we already mentioned, but also they've had a lot more time to work and plan into their planning. And I know Mark and I have talked about this, affordable housing, and figure out how they can provide housing for folks, as well as they have a robust public transportation infrastructure. So that means their transportation costs for survival budget is much lower, much lower than ours. And you can see again that Maryland average there. You can see a quick change over time for Frederick County from 32% in 2010 to 39% in 2016. And the really worrying part, though, is that that's a 10% population increase, but a 30% increase in the number of ALICE households. So we're seeing a much faster growth. And what that means, by the way, is that it's not just new people coming here for jobs and other things that is driving our number of ALICE households up. It's also folks who've never needed help. They've never needed help before, but now, because of the cost of living increasing and either them retiring and becoming on fixed income, and we'll talk about seniors in a moment, or maybe their wages just didn't keep up with inflation and other costs, now finding themselves to be ALICE. And that's important to note, because it's not, I want to be really clear, it's not just that everyone knew is ALICE. Even if that was so, that wouldn't explain these numbers. It's that both some of the new folks are, but also a lot of households who've lived here for a long time, never needed help, are now finding themselves in this financial unstable situation. And for Maryland, at the same time, it's a 22% increase over the same time period. So this, again, a snapshot of that change over time from 2010 to 2016 for Frederick County. Again, the concern we talked about earlier, that jump in the federal poverty level, which, again, we're unfortunately seeing in 2018 inching up to 10% from the latest data. And you can see, though, there's still a lot of good news. I don't want to forget that ever. There's a reason to be optimistic. Over 60% of our households still remain above that ALICE threshold. And what we'll see in a moment is, especially amongst full-time workers, that how a sizable number are actually making $100,000 or more in our county, and you'll see that in a little bit. So who is ALICE? So now we're going to talk about some of our communities, and you'll see it's a range, just like the state of Maryland. So Urbana, lowest at 15% combined, 13% ALICE, 2% federal poverty. But there's still, think in mind that there's still some federal poverty there, even in Urbana, compared to Emmitsburg, 50% ALICE, 14% federal poverty. And that 14%, as you can see, is only, on the federal poverty side, is only beaten by Brunswick. So even if we just talked about that, that would be a significant challenge in a community, even that 14% federal poverty. But now we're talking about another 50% of households, so 64% of households total in Emmitsburg that are below the cost of living. Again, there's some individual circumstances maybe being different for folks. But one thing to keep in mind, again, is it is a full range. Here's those numbers added together for all the different municipalities and towns in Frederick County. And you can see it goes from 15% in Urbana to that 64% in Emmitsburg. You see the city of Frederick at 51%. They were just below 50% last time, so they just crossed that marker. But often we'll see areas of population and cities, and this is something that goes for hundreds of years of urban history, has jobs, so it'll attract people, but also a lot of those jobs may not pay well, so there may be a large part of that population on the lower income scale. Here again, we'll see some of that data that goes along with it. You see that unemployment rate, again, as I said, even lower now, under 4% now. Health insurance rate, 96%. Just for, your education, you can see that the voter turnout is at 67%. One thing I want to mention, though, is this preschool enrollment, 57%. It's actually interesting to look at this in relation to the kindergarten readiness assessment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's a statewide tool used to assess what percentage of kindergartners are actually ready for kindergarten, for success in public school. And it's about half of our kindergartners are not ready, not demonstrating readiness for kindergarten. So that's very interesting to look at, keeping in mind that about only 57% of our young folks are actually been enrolled in preschool. And again, there's the housing burden. And you can see the market difference for owners, 22% of owners compared to 49% of renters. So we got some demographic breakdowns here. You can see the percentages for Caucasian households are much closer to that county average, just a little bit lower, at 35% compared to the county average of 39%. But one of the things we're seeing is that for all demographics, including Asian American households, which wasn't necessarily true in the past, an increasing gap between their percentage of ALICE households and the county percentage compared to Caucasian households. So that's something to be of concern. One of and just so you know, and this is something you can see if you do look at some of the data on your back of your one page that we handed out earlier tonight, or on our website. Amongst all of these groups, there's been a significant increase since 2010 in that gap. So and especially amongst Asian American and Hispanic households. So just something to keep in mind. It's not like it was these numbers all time. It was both Asian American, you see, is still under half, but Hispanic households in 2010, there wasn't even 50% of them that were ALICE and below. So that's changed in the last 6 years, from 2010 to 2016. So just wanted to share those numbers. We talked about single parents. So here's the big difference in experience for single parents compared to married parents or partners raising children. We have 18% of married households that are ALICE and below, compared to 74% of single mother households in the county, and 5% of single fathers. And I can tell you we have more single mothers than single fathers, but that is still very concerning. But you can definitely see the big gaps there. The age demographic breakdown, naturally we expect this phase to happen, right? Right when you're out of school, you are going to be at your lowest income earning potential. So this is not, I don't want anyone to be too frightened by this necessarily, but do keep some things in mind. One is that these are independent households, 18 and over. So these are not young individuals living with their parents. These are liberated, independent households. There's only about, I don't even think there's 2,000 of them in Frederick County in 2016 from this data point. But just keep that in mind. And even though it looks very dire, again, part of that's natural. Maybe you're still in school even, you're just working part-time. But also keep in mind, they need somewhere to live too if they're not living at home. So the rents and everything. You can see that as you get older, your income potential increases, and so the ALICE percentage goes down, but then jumps again when you become a senior. And that's, again, being seen throughout the country. So two things there with seniors. One is there was, I think it was about $15,000, originally it was a $10,000 2 years ago adjustment made. I think in this report it's about $15,000 a year reduction from the survival budget that we talked about. But even with that $15,000 a year reduction, and that's done because we know, trying to account for some of those circumstances individually, that seniors may have paid off a mortgage, they may own their home, they may have other assets, etc. So that adjustment's made. But even after you make that adjustment, over half of senior households below that cost of living. So one of the things we talk about is not just the need for affordable rents or more affordable rents and more affordable homes to purchase for younger workers and young families, but also seniors. There's a real housing need for seniors in our community. So I just wanted to show some of the actual number of households we're talking about. So you may be surprised that the largest number here is actually households that don't have any children and are not seniors. That's our actual largest single category of households in the county when you divide it between that, families of children, and seniors. Next is families of children and then seniors. And the senior number has grown significantly over time. And you can imagine this category here would include folks who've moved here to raise kids, but their kids are now out of the house, but they've stayed in Frederick County because they want to live here. And it also includes those at the very beginning of their careers before they've married and had children or have had children on their own. So just keep that in mind for this category here. So here you can see for that category that we just talked about, the single largest one, that there was a slight increase in the percentage that are under federal poverty, as well as an increase in those under ALICE since 2010 to 2016. Even the married households that have some of the best numbers had a slight growth in the wrong direction, you could say. Still, though, significant, over 80% above ALICE. And also a small reduction in the number of those households. By the way, most other categories have grown, but there's a small reduction in the number of married households from 2010 to 2016. You can see single female also actually went down a little bit, single female-headed households of children, but saw that the percentages increased dramatically to 74%, as we talked about earlier, from 2010. And you can see here that single male-headed households, though, have increased significantly. Now, with these smaller numbers under 5,000, it's just slight changes in the number of people reporting if they are indeed, because this is self-reported, if you're a single parent headed household, can change those percentages significantly. But that's why we wanted to show you the change from over 6 years versus just a change over 2 years with this data points. But you can see the percentages increase as well as the number of single male-headed households of children. And just some basic wage data to kind of go along with what we were just looking at here of single female versus single male-headed households is the Maryland average wage by gender and the gap, therefore, between those two levels for males and females, as well as some examples of jobs in the state of Maryland and the differences in income for wages for those different jobs between males and females. One thing to let you know is that we've had some good news here. In 2010, 54% of jobs paid less than $20 an hour. In 2016 in Maryland, only 50%. So that was a good change, a 4% movement in the right direction there. You also can see, and you'll see how this compares locally in a little bit, that most of these jobs on the lower end are not less than 10. Most of them are between 10 and 15 or 15 to 20. And you can see there's a significant number once we get to the $20 and up that are making that. In fact, you can see one of the largest wage categories in Maryland in 2016 was in the $20 to $30 range per hour. And I'm going to grab some notes I want to refer to. Because I'll talk about in a moment how some of those compare to annual wages as well. So you can see that breaks down for a single adult survival budget for Maryland was $13.03 an hour in 2016 to the $34.84 for a family of four. So here's Frederick County. This is all our full-time workers, okay? So you can see the percentage of full-time workers in the different income categories, and this is by annual wage. I'm going to try to pull up for you some of the comparison data I just mentioned. But you can see that, yes, the biggest number there, percentage there is the $25,000 to $50,000 range. But you can see that, right, the next biggest size chunk of workers after that are those making $100,000 or more, which I think would surprise a lot of people. Maybe not. You know, it depends on how close you follow these things. But that's something that I think is a very good data point. What we have found working with our partners that if you can get folks above that $50,000 range in general, there's a lot more you can do with them as far as making them more financially stable, being able to use a budget like that. Budgeting alone can actually make a big difference. But the challenge comes when you're dealing with households of any size that are making less than $50,000 a year in Frederick County. And you can see for comparison, we put a line there to show where the survival budget for a single individual is right there, right? And you can see that about 25%, a little bit, 23, 24% of workers make less than that in Frederick County who are working full-time. Remember, this is only full-time workers, so keep that in mind. And there's that family survival budget of $84,000 a year. But then again, keep in mind, you could have two workers in that family of four. So go ahead.
Well, the problem with this, of course, is there's no room for savings.
That's right.
There's no savings, there's no way to get out of this predicament. And it's only gonna get worse with inflation.
That's right.
People continue to get older and need less, and if none of them have invested properly or
Right.
own a home,
Yep.
they really have no foundation.
Correct.
To survive other than whatever they get out of Social Security.
Yep.
And if they weren't high wage earners to begin with, Social Security is really not gonna cover it. So, you know, this is one of these kind of intractable type of problems, and I don't know if you're offering up a solution.
We will talk about some ideas. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you're talking about
Yeah.
a large chunk of the population that's affected here, and there's no easy way out.
That's right. There's no easy way out. We definitely think there are things to do, and it can be overwhelming. And I know, and I apologize if I'm depressing anybody tonight. It's not my intention. You know, I get up in the morning because I think there are things we can do. I think one of the things it tells us though is it can't be any one. There's not one solution. That we know that it's too big a problem for that. We also know there's market forces at play that are far beyond Frederick County. But also we know that it can't just be government. It can't just be nonprofits. It can't just be businesses. It needs to be all of us working together on these issues, especially like targeting and focusing on the biggest ones. Remember I mentioned housing earlier, or childcare, transportation, because if we can make a dent in those, that can make a ripple effect dent in the rest of that budget. So that's something to keep in mind too. We definitely think education is a huge way out. That's probably the if there is a magic bullet, that's the one I would mention the most.
But you don't need it for your survival budget, so.
But one of the challenges folks find is that if you can just get by, that may feel like success if you're used to not getting by, right? So that's something to keep in mind and talk about. We see that a lot with some of the families that we work with. The other thing we see, for whatever reason, is that women are much more likely to take advantage of programs to improve their situation than men who are finding themselves down their luck. And that's something we see anecdotally and through the numbers, through the data. Sorry, we had a question in the back here.
Don't you think that healthcare, getting a harness on some of that would really help a lot of this stuff? Because it's driving everything
Yeah.
up.
That's the single biggest increase in costs is healthcare, over 50% increase in costs for 2010 and 2016.
I don't know how many of these can take advantage of like Medicaid.
Yeah. So we're very fortunate. Maryland, one of the reasons we have such a high insured rate is that Maryland expanded, Medicaid, and made sure that more families could get access to reduced rates. In fact, one of the few programs that goes beyond 200% of the federal poverty level in qualifying folks for assistance is Maryland health insurance subsidies. They go up to, I think, almost 600% or somewhere between 400 and 600%. You get at least some reduction to afford the health insurance. And we already, even before the Affordable Care Act, we had a very strong Maryland state health insurance program. So that's something that we're very fortunate to have. But remember what I said, there's the dental, that doesn't cover a lot of dental needs though. And we see a big connection as you get older between dental health and heart health. And we know heart health is the biggest killer. So again, you can see the challenge there. Though we are fortunate to have a wonderful dental clinic that the Frederick Memorial Hospital System runs, as well as Mission of Mercy being active in our community and others.
And the Seton Center.
And Seton Center, thank you. It reminded me of Emmitsburg. Don't tell Sister Martha I didn't say that. Sister Martha and I, and those groups I mentioned, as well as Religious Coalition, Community Action Agency, all meet quarterly to talk about adult dental needs in the community, by the way. So there are a lot of folks already working on some of these issues. We just got to get more people involved. We had a question here.
Struck me when you were talking about how, as people age, the other thing they never cover is disability from arthritis. But you can't get a podiatrist or without paying out of pocket, at least for orthopedic stuff, things like that. And I don't know if you've factored the disability aspect for as working as you age
Yeah.
Is also something that's a problem.
Yeah, I would just say that that would obviously make the situation even more challenging. But yeah, this doesn't assume that anyone in the household is disabled. So,
But also diabetes is really increasing in
Right.
this county.
sure.
That goes back to the poor food budget and just
Yep.
strained.
And transportation too, if you need to get to dialysis and things like that. So by the way, I promised earlier to give you some approximations of how this breaks down compared to that Maryland data. So $20 an hour is about $41,000 a year to help you out. And then that $100,000 and above, that means they're making over $48 an hour or more. So again, just if you want to compare this slide to the previous one. And some other things to keep in mind, we talked about how federal poverty level determines a lot of the ways people qualify for qualify for assistance. That also means that if you have a community which has a higher federal poverty rate, one of the good sides of that, though it'd be hard to say any of it's good, is that they're getting more federal assistance to help cover that population. While if you have a population like Frederick County overall, where federal poverty is relatively low compared to a lot of other communities, but we have a lot more people above it, but below the cost of living, that's a real challenge for a community to live locally because they're not getting the federal support, even though really it's not because people are just choosing to spend their money on frivolous things. It's that literally just costs more to buy the basics. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a challenge that Frederick County has, while a high federal poverty level community like Somerset County or Western Maryland, the counties in Western Maryland, don't have, because they have more federal support coming through. So it's just kind of a thing to keep in mind, an unintended consequences kind of concept. So if we go through here, this is actually Frederick data. Not before it was just Maryland wage data. This is actually Frederick County wage data from 2016. Looking at the top five plus industries, the percentage of those employed, and what's the median hourly wage in 2016 for each of those for a typical position within those industries. And based on what we've talked about to those who are in these industries, this seemed accurate to them. So you can see that only one of these is over the $17 an hour for an individual, the bookkeeping and auditing clerks positions. The rest of them are below that. And even with this, depending on how many kids you have, that could quickly run out if you don't have both, if you're a single parent household or if you don't have two parents working. But I want to go back to something that was brought earlier, because of course there is that trade-off, right? Does one parent stay at home, save money on childcare? The challenge there economically, what's the opportunity cost, is the years lost in the workforce, years lost in experience. And so are you going to be as attractive a candidate when you're applying for a job when you're reentering the workforce versus someone who never left? So that's one of the challenges, the opportunity cost, if you will, for someone who's decided to take some years off to take care of the kids. So it's something to keep in mind. And maybe part of it is that we're encouraging, hey, businesses, don't always look away when you see someone who's trying to reenter the workforce. Maybe try to support that, because we don't want to discourage people from working. We want people, because working can be one of the ways that we can go towards savings. And savings, as we talked about, can be one of the ways we go towards education or buying a home. And that can become the ways that we have an asset that you can actually live off or use, so you don't have to rely on public support when you retire and you're a senior. So it all is connected. So just want to show you again some localized examples of jobs in our community in 2016. And we can see here too, this is also Frederick County data. This is showing the number of jobs in different business sizes. So for example, this Blue box here are businesses that employ 0 to 19 employees, and that's their average salary for employees. Okay, for the most part, as you grow in size as a business, your average wage goes up. That's pretty typical. The one exception we have here is at the top here for businesses of 250 to 500 employees. We have a few call centers here in Frederick County that kind of fit this demographic, and the call center wages tend to be a lot lower than other professional white collar jobs. So that seems to be the explanation there. And then you can see large firms, and of course we do have a lot of large firms and that's employs over 35,000 folks in the county. Obviously, there's people going down the road, but there's also the Frederick County Education System is our largest employer, and of course Fort Detrick and all of the contractors around that. And those businesses are quite large. A lot of those are large corporations with satellite offices here. So just something to keep in mind. We're not going to spend too much time on this because we're not the city of Frederick, but I just wanted to show you that one of the things we did that is new is provide an enhanced breakdown by NAC of ALICE data for the city of Frederick. And just like everywhere else, you can see there's a lot tale of multiple communities here. There's some lighter areas is less ALICE, darker is more. And you can see this is not perfect. This is NAC overlaid with the census tracts. They don't perfectly align, but it gives you some approximate information. And again, most usefully showing that even within the city of Frederick, there's a lot of different types of economic situations going on every day. And by the way, this is Baker Park area here. Up through here is 15. Here's 40, and then 70 cuts through here, of course. So this is the fairgrounds, and then you have Lucas Village and the airport over here. The reason why there's no roads here is because of Fort Detrick. So the researchers were the first confused. They're like, "What's going on here?" And like, "Oh yeah, that's Fort Detrick." So these are just City of Frederick roads on this map. So just to give you a quick viewpoint there. One of the things we also did that's new is we looked at some health indicators compared to the ALICE data. So that first one again is the different counties in the state of ALICE threshold percentage compared to maps showing average number of poor fair mental health days from the state behavioral risk survey, average life expectancy, and percent body mass, index over 30. So this is something I wanted to show you guys too. This is a low food access map. The white areas are no data. So just to make that clear. So it's not saying that there's 0% low food access. It's saying that there's not enough data in the ones that are purely white. But you can see there's some challenges here. This is before the grocery store opened in Brunswick. So that would be improved on the next map. And then again, here shows you the heat map of the county with ALICE percentages. And this is showing the air quality demand score. Darker, this is the only time where darker is actually good and lighter is less. There's not data released for the airport, so that's why that's white. Otherwise, this is data that's being illustrated on actual air quality domain scores. This is coming out of a Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments report.
Malcolm,
Yeah.
why would air quality be different in different?
Those two.
Into what?
Like, why is it different in South Frederick opposed to
Oh.
North Frederick?
Nuisance emissions.
Sure. So you have all kinds of reasons. One, you have number of people, traffic.
But we have
Tree
less
coverage.
traffic and less industry up here. I don't understand.
So, I see what you're saying. That could do with, honestly, it could do with wind blowing things from other states.
Oh, I see.
It does. It's not just when it comes to air quality, you're not constrained to what is within the borders of Frederick County. You're susceptible to, and and that's one of the things that I asked too, because I was trying to figure this out, and even the folks at COG couldn't get me the best answers. But one of the things I try to make sure we're absolutely sure. Okay, are we sure that darker is better? And they said, yeah, it is. I'm like, okay. So the higher air quality domain score is better. So there you have it. So this is different than if you have an iPhone. They just added the air quality index. That's two different things. Just want to make sure everyone understands that. If you have an iPhone, they actually added the air quality index number when you go on Apple Maps and search up a city. That's different than the air quality domain score. Two different things. They use some of the same data. So this slide I wanted to show real quick because I wanted to stress that. Remember we saw those earlier slides showing the percentage difference in gaps between white households and minority households. Well, the largest one type of household that is ALICE are white households. So there's more white households that are Alice than there are minority households, period, in Frederick County. So that's the most typical Alice household in Frederick County is a white household.
It might be because we're the highest Alice, and we're also the whitest in the county. You know, when you gave the demographics about the Hispanics and other.
Oh, when you're saying we, you're saying Emmitsburg.
Emmitsburg,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, yeah,
white.
yeah, yeah.
And so that might bump that out because we're 86.27% white.
There you go.
Whereas not
Right.
Hispanic. So it's interesting listening to your presentation
Yeah.
because we're hearing a lot of Frederick County as a whole.
Yeah.
And we're anomalous. Our demographics are anomalous when we've been working,
Mhm.
talking with the Literacy Council where a lot of their
It's very different, yeah.
ESL and other things. That's not our issues.
Yeah.
You know, so it's interesting to hear this and to understand how we fit in.
And there's also a larger senior population here. So
That's true.
one of the things I didn't show up here, but that we have in our new data that we'll be releasing soon is showing a heat map of how senior households are broken out throughout the county. And there's a much higher proportion in Emmitsburg and Thurmont and Brunswick compared to most of the rest of the county. There is in the southeast city of Frederick a hotspot of seniors, but that's so yes, the age of your population in Emmitsburg and the lack of diversity definitely plays into why the Alice percentage is higher here.
I just think it's important to mention on the slide when we say that. because
Oh,
people
sure.
might be thinking, oh, that's interesting if they're just thinking about
Yeah.
it in terms of Frederick.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
wouldn't necessarily be noting how Emmitsburg might be skewing that number for the overall.
Or-
Frederick County.
Or how the Emmitsburg is so different than the rest of the county.
Right.
Absolutely.
So when we look at
Yep.
county and we're average, then we're.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why I chose these, I didn't choose these for any particular reason except for one, which is that this is from the largest number of Alice households to the lowest. These are the top most likely characteristics. So you can see the next most likely characteristic is that you're senior. So we just talked about that, right? But I do want you to note that how much it jumps down, right? So over 10,000 senior households, and then the next highest most likely Alice category is your African American, but there's a huge difference, 6,000 households less, and then it goes lower and lower from there. So for example, you'll see that there's more married households of children that are Alice than there are single female. Because even though 74% of single female-headed households of children are Alice, there's only a few thousand compared to the thousands of ones that are married.
It would be
So-
interesting to run those numbers for the whole county, would take Emmitsburg out, and see
So-
how anomalous it is.
So the only data point we could get geographically specified that way was on the seniors. Unfortunately, they couldn't break down geographically the other ones for us. That's just the way the data is presented in the ACS, the American Community Survey. And again, that's going to be coming out from us very shortly, the senior data, broken down by
Census
geography.
data and other data points.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that even in the census data, because they try to maintain integrity and privacy of communities. If it's a certain number, they won't tell you. You see what I'm saying? They won't give you a geographical location if it's a certain number or lower. And also, there's other various reasons, some even political, why data is presented the way it is. So, but that is coming out soon. I'd say the next few weeks. The senior specialized report, which does show the geographic breakdown of seniors throughout the county by census tract and which percentage of them are Alice or not. But I just gave you a preview in that description. So that was recorded, right? So you can go back and watch it later. So just wanted to mention those things. And you can see how many fewer single male-headed households of children are Alice than single female, for example, on here. And the other thing I want to mention real quick, I promise I'll tell you where to find this information on our website. So you go to unitedwayfrederick.org, you put your mouse over what we do, then you'll see one that pops up saying Alice, defining the problem or the need in our community. And then you put your mouse over that, and that pops up Alice for Maryland, and then Alice for Frederick. And if you click on Alice for Frederick, you'll get the latest data. So I want to jump through these. These are just some examples that Alice can be a young family starting out. It can be a single mother with 2 children, or it can be a senior couple, retiring and finding themselves not able to make ends meet. Why are there so many Alice households in the county? We talked about some of these: affordability of housing, childcare, public transportation. 2 things I want to mention we didn't talk about quickly is that earned income tax credit is a great tool to move folks out of federal poverty. We have a robust FIDA program that both run by the Prosperity Center and our partners, but also one run by the Senior Center and ARP. So we're really excited about that. But if you don't have children, the credit is much less, and the federal credit isn't even available to you unless you're 25 years old or older. The state of Maryland did make some changes in their version of the credit, so younger workers now are eligible, but still the credit is much less if you're a worker without children. We think it'd be great to tweak that a bit so that we can stabilize some of those households before they have kids rather than wait till after their kids are there. The other item here is we talk about issues of addiction. That definitely adds to the financial instability of a community if there's significant issues of addiction. We are dealing with a opiate crisis, as you know, but please don't forget that we still have far more people suffering from alcoholism and far more deaths by alcoholism than opiate addiction. Please don't forget that. And that issue of addiction definitely disproportionately affects ALICE households. If those of you are familiar with ACEs, if any of you are familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, it's about the number of traumatic events that happen from you from in the womb through 5 years old. And research shows that if you have 3 or more of those, you're significantly at more risk throughout your lifetime for negative health outcomes, ranging from drug use to suicide attempts to even cancer and heart disease. So, and that's research that's been done in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Kaiser Permanente, but then verified by others. And also now there's a genetic component called epigenetics, which looks at how even if you've processed, or you could say dealt with your trauma, stabilized yourself both mentally, emotionally, and financially, even if that has happened, there's still a chance you can pass on some of that behavior and predisposition to mental illness to your children. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind. Again, it's not, don't mean to depress anyone, don't mean to be all bad news, but it's all about just being aware of the whole picture. And kind of like the old thing people tell us, or moms tell us growing up, is you have no idea what someone else is going through behind that door, or what their day was like before they said a crossword to you, or they didn't make eye contact with you when you said hello. There's a story, right, behind all those doors. There's a story behind everyone's experience and how they got to where they are. It doesn't mean we can have to accept it, but it does mean that we can know what the full picture is, but a better idea what the full picture is, so we can work together to make sure everyone's enjoying the incredibly high quality of life here we have in Frederick County. This is some things we already talked about thanks to your great questions. It's an aggregation of data. It's not going to describe every single type of household. Individual circumstances will prevail. It does help to measure successes and challenges of the local economy, because we saw there's a lot of successes, a lot of things to crow about, but it also can mean there's an increasing number of folks having a hard time making ends meet, partially because of that very success. One of the things I want to mention, though, we talked about education earlier. A lot of you may know this already. We have a lot of great biotech jobs in our community. We have a very robust building community. There's some really good paying jobs there. The trades are a great source of income. All those cannot find enough people to fill those jobs. One of the things that's driving housing costs, maybe to a small degree, but if, let's say, there's a shortage of skilled tradesmen, that means the skilled tradesmen that are there can demand the premium on costs because there's no competition, or less competition. So we want to see more programs like CDC and others at the community college level for adults to encourage education and certification in the trades towards financially successful careers and prosperous futures, as well as finding a pipeline to get people from high school to those biotech jobs. Because I can tell you it's cheaper for those companies by far, those big corporations, AstraZeneca, et cetera, to hire locally than it is to hire from out of state or even abroad. They'd prefer to hire locally, but they have to have the education, right? They have to have the skills. So, and as we said, a surging economy and growing ALICE population is not mutually exclusive. And this is only one way to measure things. There's lots of other tools. I encourage you to look at the new Community Foundation's needs assessment that just came out. It's available on their website. That's Community Foundation of Frederick County. It's a fantastic resource, and they have some great interactive tools on their website that you can look at and compare our data to other communities. And they do look at ALICE, by the way, as far as families of children who are in need, but they also look at a lot of other great data. Some of which we talked about today. And their other focuses, by the way, are families of children, seniors, and households dealing with substance abuse. So we talked about some of this already too. The big one I want to mention is because we mentioned it earlier. We talked about savings, but also we didn't talk about credit. Credit is a huge component to access to wealth. because even if you're relatively financially stable, or at least not in debt, you still not be building credit because you may not have anything that's building credit for you. You may not have a credit card. Maybe you're renting and you don't have a mortgage payment. So we got to look at ways to help people build credit. I can say it's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of the first-time homebuyer programs we have in the county. Is the first thing almost always we got to do is help either stabilize their credit and increase it, or they may have no credit and help them develop one. And that takes a few months to a year at least. So that's a big challenge for folks accessing the cheaper prices relatively compared for house mortgages compared to rent in our county. And of course, there's always dealing with systemic biases and historical prejudices. And again, it's nothing is in a vacuum. That's not the one problem or challenge, but it can compound other situations and compound other issues. Simply from the fact that what if you grew up and you didn't know anyone who was middle class or higher? That alone is a disadvantage, because you just don't know someone who can walk you through buying a home. You don't know someone who can walk you through the right way to do student loans or how to find scholarships. Just think about not having that, and that could set you back compared to others. So there's something to think about. And again, we really believe strongly there are opportunities. I talked about the jobs available. We want to help people get to work. We want to help people have a stable income, a prosperous income, so they can fully engage in our community. So United We Must Fight for Alice. United, we do believe we will win. I love this community. I've been living in the city of Frederick for 7 years. Therefore, and also Frederick County, obviously, coming here from Tacoma Park in the DC area. My wife and I she's also not from this area, but we both fell in love with the county and the city of Frederick. We really believe Frederick County is a special place. Nowhere else, as far as we know, even in the country, even though we have about 20 states have done ALICE reports, has embraced it as Frederick County has. And what I mean is not just the wonks, not just the media, not just nonprofits, but also government and business and concerned citizens like yourself. You should be really proud of that, because that's not the story that's happening everywhere else. Frederick County tends to be very engaged and wants to know what's going on in their communities. And I think that's a great reason to be optimistic in the future. So again, I mentioned these websites. The Prosperity Center is just one of the things going on. There's also great programs being done by Interfaith Housing Alliance, the Religious Coalition, Advocates for Homeless Families, the Seton Center we talked about earlier, the Thurmont Ministerium. There's a lot of great groups doing what they can to help. There's also, as I said, programs I mentioned both at this public school system and also community college, as well as increasing ways that county government's partnering with nonprofits to maximize resources, whether it be the first-time home buyer program with United Way, the Prosperity Center, or working on issues such as the census. We just worked with the county to apply for a grant with the state to bring resources to increase our accurate count and census. And I mentioned that I'll get back to that, and I want to just stress that now that I know you, I'll be coming back to you next time, I hope, to ask for something in return, and that is helping get the word out about the census and encouraging participation, because not only is it going to be some questions on there people may be afraid to answer, though even if you don't answer a question, they'll still use the rest of your data. It's also going to be supposedly all digital, and that's a big concern to households without internet access, obviously. Liz, go ahead.
At our last town meeting on the first of the month, we had the recruiter for the census
Oh, good.
here, and that information's available on the town website. And it's
Wonderful.
a nice chunk of change.
Yeah, it's a good paying job.
Yeah, for 40 hours a week,
Mm-hmm.
or what you can do
If you have a car. Yeah.
if you have a car.
It's time limited. It's only 8 weeks.
It is temporary.
It is temporary, but it's a nice little temporary chunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could use that chunk to pay for school or,
And it's
something
on
else.
your
So
time frame, as long as you could see the house.
When does it start?
I think it just, I think it's
don't
already,
remember.
I know they're hiring now.
They're recruiting
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, they're hiring now.
I know there was
Yeah.
a problem with the last census that was done in Emmitsburg, because at the time, we had a P.O. box, and we never got the mailing, to fill out for the census. And, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for it, and I finally went into the post office to ask, and was told that because I had a P.O. box and mine came addressed to our street address, because that's what the
Right.
government was using, that all of those were returned.
Yeah, well, I found with the post office that I can't get something delivered to someone if I don't know the post box number, and they won't tell you what that post box number
But this
is.
this was the federal government census being sent
Yeah.
out.
No, that's exactly one of the challenges.
And the
Yep.
US that the post office just set back because they didn't have, and I think that may have affected
Oh, absolutely.
the census that was.
We Emmitsburg.
The whole point
Yeah.
when they're hiring census workers, they're actually
I got it.
I'll get it.
census. I mean, they're going house
Yeah.
to house to house. So
Oh.
if you didn't report, somebody should show up at your house
Yeah.
and take the census.
They
for you.
did, but not everybody's gonna answer the door to someone.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, that's one of the challenges.
It's absolutely one of the challenges, and we already had an undercount in some of the more rural areas, including Emmitsburg, in the 2010 census. You're absolutely right. That's one of the things we're doing with the county, and what I just mentioned. And that effort is beyond the federal outreach. We're going to be doing outreach through the county government and nonprofits. And so, let's say you didn't answer your door, that we let you know how else you can access it, and make sure we increase the return rate, because it's in everyone's best interest to have an accurate census count. We've literally talked about that very situation you brought up in the preliminary talks and as we worked on that grant application. So stay tuned for that, because there'll be a complete count committee formed for the county, and every local population can decide to form their own. There's no restriction on that. The city of Frederick's probably going to form one too, for example. So Emmitsburg could form a complete count committee as well, and tie into that network. So stay tuned for more on that. I promised to say some other things about what we're doing. I mentioned the advocacy platform, so that's also on our website. Obviously, we're focusing on affordable housing. It's a big part of our picture. And just to be clear, it's not just subsidized housing; it's the full spectrum of housing, from subsidized housing, Section 8, but also moderately priced dwelling units for workforce housing. Another way to think about it could be, remember those young workers, millennial housing, right? Where are they going to live? A big part too is we want to make sure that the rents that are there are also safe, right? And the landlords are enforcing and taking care of the requirements and regulations on that. Frederick County is a bit different. It doesn't require registration of rental properties, so it's a bit different than a lot of other communities in Maryland. So as we're growing, we just got to think about how we're going to look at those things. And the answer, believe me, I'm a landlord myself. I'll confess to that in Montgomery County, because I bought a condo, studio apartment at the height of right before the recession hit, and so it was underwater on that mortgage, and so there's no sense in selling it. So now it's a rental property, I work very hard to be a good landlord on that. But also, even if I wasn't, that would be impossible, because Tacoma Park is very, very good at making sure everyone follows all the rules. So we got to just think of those things to make sure that we're providing safe as well as affordable housing to folks. But yeah, any other questions? I know, and as everyone know, Wyatt with the Frederick News Post. We introduced ourselves earlier, Wyatt. So, did you have any questions for us tonight, Wyatt? Okay. Cool. So, Liz, you invited me here. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for coming.
So
Thank you.
no problem. So, and I've also mentioned, Mark, one of your neighbors, can talk more about this. There's a great housing report on the housing needs in the county that came out in November 2016 that talks about the need for that throughout the community, not just here in Emmitsburg. So,
The reason Malcolm keeps saying my name is I'm on the Frederick County Affordable
thank
Housing
you,
Task
Mark.
Force.
Yes, I do know
Affordable
that.
housing's like my issue.
So, yeah, Mark's the vice chair, right? To get that right. And I am a member of the council as well, and representing United Way's interest in that area. But yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Do you guys have any questions for Malcolm before we close?
I don't wanna close yet because I
Yeah.
have some things to share too.
Okay.
On the literacy council.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of handouts. I know, first of all, thank you, Malcolm, for doing. Last time we were together, we talked about the Alice, and we had some of the statistics, and we're looking at Emmitsburg, and I was
Can you
really,
go in the microphone so everyone hears? Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Wendy Walsh. I think I know most people. And I'm also a member of the Friends of the Library. And we were talking about why is it like this? Why do we have so many Alice people? And the discussion about jobs came up and whether or not people can get jobs around here, what jobs. And you mentioned many jobs that are in Frederick County, but due to our transportation issues and other issues, it's hard to get down. You also mentioned about education. Again, there aren't many courses available right here for the general public to take. So what could we do? And after a little bit of discussion, we talked about maybe there are issues with literacy, maybe to ask the Seton Center to talk to Sister Martha and see what we could find out. Her impression was that there isn't that big of an issue with literacy. But when we talked to the librarians, they said there is an issue with people coming in and not having computer literacy. So asking the librarians if they can help them to navigate websites. If they don't have internet at home, they're not used to that. And there may be some literacy issues. So we reached out to the Literacy Center of Frederick County and the librarian and myself and Lori Fisher, who is the executive director, came up here and we talked about can we offer some programs here? And so we are now going to offer a couple of orientation sessions at the Emmitsburg Branch Library on Monday, June 24th. That's on the handout. There's a lot of other times too. So if you have the ability to drive and can go do that, that would be great. And then and that one's a daytime one. So it's 10 to 11. And then on Tuesday, the 25th, there's an evening orientation orientation session at the Thurmont Library. And then you'll see there's the tutor training workshops. And those are 2 full Saturdays that you go to. And last time we met, there were about 4 people who included myself and Diane and a few others that said they might be willing to do that. So we might not do it like they do it in Frederick because a lot of what they're doing is English as a second language and helping people actually learn to read. But the librarian said, hey, when people come in and they need maybe a couple of hours or someone to help them figure out how to navigate a website to find out about educational opportunities or job opportunities, that we can say, oh, well, maybe Diane or Wendy or, somebody's around. Let's schedule a time and then we can go from there. So really make it kind of for the community, by the community. And then as we sort of see what people need and identify what sort of jobs or opportunities, maybe we can work with Frederick Community College. But really think, I appreciate the presentation. And again, I'm just like, I saw those numbers. I read those reports online and it's sad. What can we do? What can we do as a community to help each other? And so that's why we kind of started with this literacy council. So I'd love it if you'd consider being a tutor. If it's not your bag, share it with other people as an opportunity. Because I think one of the things about Emmitsburg, and I've just been here 4 years, is that it has a big heart. People really do care about each other, but we all get busy in our own lives. And if we just take the time to say, hey, do you have a couple hours you could sit down and just help somebody navigate a website? That's not too much for us
Can
to
you let
ask of
people
each
know
other.
how they can contact you? Because this is going over Channel 99, so other people may be interested in getting involved.
Yeah, well, these flyers will be available at our library. Our library right here that we're attached to is an incredible resource to our community. And it's not just for families with kids, it's for everybody. And so if you don't know, there's also an adult book club there. There's a lot of things going on and we could really utilize our library more. And so the flyers will be at the library and you can pick those up and you have to
Or to ask the librarian.
ask the librarians, the information desk, they know everything. Or they'll look it up.
So this is where you'd ask to be a tutor there too?
Yeah, if you want to be, this is what this is. This is about the tutor. So you need to go to the information session. You have to go to the 1-hour information session. And they are on the 24th and 25th of June. One's during the day, so that might be hard for people who work a full-time job. But the Tuesday one on the 25th at Thurmont is in the evening. And then once you attend that, then you can attend the tutoring session. So the closest one is actually going to be at the Thurmont Regional Library, and the first Saturday will be July 27th, and the following one August 3rd. And a lot of this was because we were looking to do it within the library. And so there's limitations on the space, especially in the summer, because the summer reading program and a lot of other things are going on for the space. If we find that people are interested in Huh?
I think these are
This
the
is
wrong
not the same
ones.
flyer.
Oh, there's 2 flyers.
Yeah.
We have the other flyer. So
Oh.
we're like, where
We're like, what is she talking about?
So the other one that I passed out
Oh,
is the
that's
spring
better.
class schedule. So in addition to just being a general tutor, you might want to get, if you wanted to volunteer maybe in Frederick or where there were more English as a second language, there's specific courses you can take on English as a second language. There's ones on the online learning lab. Like if you have some computer proficiency, but you want to know, how do I actually teach somebody instead of just move aside, let me show you how to do it, you know,
Right.
but really learning. So they have some classes also on writing too. So
Wendy, you said the biggest need that you heard from the librarian was not for basic literacy, but for
Computer literacy.
little
computers, navigating the website, trying to find things, doing job searches. When you found, like, if you found something that looked like, hey, I might qualify for this county job. I mean, I work for the federal government as you do, Diane, and it's navigating these sites, even when you have advanced degrees, can be very challenging. And so how to help people do that, how to help people upload a resume or even develop a resume. I think that we'll find as we meet with people what the needs are, and we can work together as a community of tutors too and help support each other. What we're finding, and the library is really interested. They're kind of overwhelmed when people come and ask because they don't have a huge staff. So when somebody comes and asks and they really do need help doing something, they only have a minimal time to help them. So if we could come and kind of force multiply their efforts.
Right, okay.
That's not part of the literacy council, but do they offer any classes, or can we offer any classes in budgeting and finance? A lot of people,
Yeah.
The Seton Center actually does
They
do
do-
that. They filled that void, yeah. Mhm.
another part of the school system doesn't cover it.
but
Yeah.
the Seton Center's program though is like you have to sign up for a 13-week program.
They have more. Yeah, they have more than one program. They have the Getting Ahead program, which is that big program we've been talking about. But then I know they also do financial coaching too, and some people are just working individually with people on budgets, and so they have a lot of.
You would be surprised how many resources, even if you need to take a driver's ed class, they have someone to help you there. There's
Yeah.
a lot. You just have to ask.
But it's interesting that you asked the question, because I think you've been around here for a long time. Geez, if somebody knows what's going on, you know a lot about what's going on, and that's still new news. And so there's got to be some way that we can do a better job of getting the word out too, just like the idea of census jobs. I didn't hear about that until tonight.
Right.
And I'm always looking at the Emmitsburg town, and so somehow I just missed it in my news feed. So maybe that's something, as our group, as a citizens advisory group, we need to be talking about how to get the word out. Maybe you wouldn't necessarily need it, but maybe you have a renter that you're like, hey, that might really be something. Yeah. Right.
Right.
I know Turning Point is part of Way Station, I think, down in Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
They offer a good amount of help,
Yeah.
helping people.
Budget. Well, there's a lot of organizations, like even at Frederick Community College, they have a women to women's group that does all of that. It's fantastic. And I mean, I've been struggling with my whole term how to get information out to people. For example, our senior center has a grant for Meals on Wheels in Emmitsburg. And I'm trying to get people to know about that. We have a lot of elderly people who don't have good food to eat. They don't have, and we have a grant, but how do I tell them? How do I get it to them? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that should be a topic for a future meeting, to really talk about how do we communicate in ways that are people can hear it.
You know, maybe we just need to knock on doors and just tell people. I mean, I'm sorry, old fashioned.
Right.
You know, like, I love Emmitsburg Cares, but I can't.
A lot of people don't have the internet.
Yeah,
And they don't have smartphones where they can go and.
I got excited.
Yeah, then
Keep
it's
getting excited.
Is it all right if I say something?
Go ahead.
The Scene Center and some other groups participate in my budget coach program. So that's a budget coaching program that's available to all Frederick County residents. It's a great program, working through the cash campaign from Maryland, and access to that. But also,
If this is really good, can you go into the speaker so people?
Yeah, say it again. Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean.
That's okay.
If you have anything else, maybe you should finish, and then I'll. Okay, all right. So anyway, I was just going to say that the Seton Center and several other nonprofits throughout the county have a budget coach program available to Frederick County residents. Budget coach program, and it's actually made available through the actual program they use, the actual instruction material they use through a partnership with Cash Campaign for Maryland, which all they do is financial stability work for Maryland residents. So that's something you do have available in your community. As far as getting the word out, and that is very difficult. Something that we find very successful is, and you already are doing it, is libraries are huge, so huge in that. Libraries are such a great tool, and we found them to be very good partners in helping get the word out on things. And you just can't do enough at the library. And also, are all of you aware of 211, the hotline?
Yes, I am.
211. So 211 is a great hotline. So even if you have only a
But-
moment to talk to someone,
Okay.
211 has information on the budget coach program. They
Oh.
have information on the dental program at Seton Center. And if you think they don't have the information, because you can always call them and test them, then you can actually contact the Mental Health Association that runs our local call center and help them get the up-to-date information. Or say, hey, Seton Center, you might want to update your profile with Mental Health Association.
I
So
thought that was like a crisis hotline.
see, a lot of people think it's only for that.
Yeah,
and it
that's
is
what I
that.
thought.
And it actually merged with the Maryland Crisis Hotline just recently. But as well as Crisis Hotline, it's also just a general resource information for help.
Do we pay for that? Because I know that's.
Yeah, you do.
Who pays for, we pay for it?
We all pay for it, yeah. So there's a few ways we pay for that. One is there is some crisis hotline support through phone bills, but a lot of people are on cell phones now, and that cell phone bill mostly supports 911. But our Maryland tax dollars support it, as well as some federal tax dollars. So we're all paying for it. So, but it's a free number to call. And resource. So just wanted to mention those things. But this is great, and I'm really happy to hear you guys talking about this because exactly we gotta get everyone involved. Yep.
I'm sorry to be a boss.
That's all right.
Partnership with Cash Cow is what I heard.
Oh,
What is it? What is it?
that'd be a cool name. And I want access to that. Let's all get access to that. No, Cash Campaign
Cash Campaign.
for Maryland, and they're one of the big partners too on the advocacy work we're doing in Annapolis on the earned income tax credit. And one thing I just want to mention too is you talked about volunteerism. That's a huge way to help. What can we do? That's one of the things we can do. Advocacy. So you don't have to necessarily agree with our advocacy platform, but know what your individual advocacy platform is and talk to your elected officials about it, both here in Emmitsburg and in Frederick County and in Annapolis. Being the size of county we are, you have a unique opportunity to have a good relationship with all those representatives. And we do have, changes happening down the line, supposedly on districting. So we'll have different representation too, as far as more localized, possibly in the congressional level. But in the meantime, David Trone's opening an office in Frederick County soon, in Washington County. So take advantage of that. And then lastly, one of the ways we could do all this is, not without money. So as well as your tax dollars, your philanthropic dollars, your donations make a big difference too, to Seton Center and to other groups, including the library. Because I heard you say Friends of the Library. So.
Can you get us any 211 swag? I know.
Oh,
I
sure.
another-
Yeah.
Can you send some of that up here?
Yeah.
I don't think
I'll make
we're
a note of
all
that.
paid for.
Yeah, yeah.
211 was a thing we paid for. Everybody knew about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
We used it for all of our emergency preparedness. And
Sure.
I've been here. I never realized that we had 211 here. I didn't think
Yeah.
that we were enrolled in that. So I don't.
Sure.
You didn't really know either.
Well, I knew from a teacher standpoint for parents who have maybe problematic children, you could use 211 to get therapeutic support if your child's in crisis. That's how I know it because that's how I've experienced it, but I didn't know the other facets.
Yeah.
211 where I came from for moving here. I mean, it was you have a transportation issue, are interested in budget coaching,
Yep,
are in
all those things.
anything that you
I had no
are
idea.
wondering about.
Yep.
Because a lot of people would call 911 and ask those silly questions. I mean, they're important questions, but the wrong place to
Yeah.
dial. So
Wrong
they develop
place.
He can also help you know how to pay for help, where you can find help to pay for your utility bills, as well as point you towards housing counseling or the community action agency if you're worried about facing foreclosure.
24/7.
24/7.
Can we put it in the next bill?
It's available by.
Bill, can we put it in the information about that?
We'll put it in the notes and the.
You can
town
even
manager
text
will
it.
see
You can
that.
text 211.
Yeah.
You don't even have to call them.
Right.
You can text it.
I didn't know you could text either.
So yeah, you can text.
Who knew?
Those are all the texts right now are handled by two centers in Maryland. Eventually they'll be handled by people here in Frederick, but they have access to the same database. So the texting works, no problem. And we even use it for VITA to schedule tax appointments. So people don't have to know another number. They just call 211, they schedule a tax appointment.
So let's say, like that information I just shared about the tutoring sessions,
Yeah.
how do I get that to 211?
So that's the Literacy Council, right?
Uh-huh.
Right, you're working with them on that. So I would talk to Lori and
So Lori
and make sure
pushes
that'd be
all of our
that
information
would be
to
the most
211?
appropriate way to do it.
Okay.
Is whatever agency is working on the issue. Though you can always alert that agency that their information needs updated, or encourage them to, hey, you're doing a new thing. Make sure 211 knows about it.
Yeah, okay.
And
Because
let's make sure Sister Martha knows to share that information too,
Yeah,
because
and I know if all of the Seton Center is
Exactly.
putting her stuff up on 211?
I know at least some of it's there, but it's always good to check.
Okay.
You know, I always
So-
thought of 211 as for help with people after disasters. but
That's one of the things. It does
Oh,
that
well.
too. Does that too.
regular.
Yeah, it's a great service, and United Way and 211 go way back to where it was first started, and we have strong connections locally. Even Josh Pedersen, our previous CEO at United Way Frederick County, is the current national director of 211, still living here in Frederick County, and so he's been working on a lot of really neat things, bringing them into the 21st century. But it's a great resource, and we are huge supporters of it at United Way.
did you say Lori Fisher is the name?
She's the executive director of Literacy
She's the
Council.
director of the literacy council. I'm just
Okay.
saying our note right now.
Well, yeah, we're putting it in the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I'll make a note. The library should already have some 211 swag, but I will make a note to
Yeah,
make sure we get some more.
We don't have any. We've
sure.
forgotten so many
That's
times.
something that should be up on Channel 99 and
Oh, yeah.
Stickers,
You can put it
there's
everywhere.
Things that you
Yep.
can get, pens, I
Yep.
don't know what all they have, but we
Oh,
should
yeah.
be sending
yeah,
them
we
out
need
stuff.
that.
Yeah,
We need
and
that.
If we don't knock on doors, we could even have a table.
Like a goodie or a goodie bag, or that.
And at,
Those are always good.
Community Day.
Yep.
Yes, definitely have it at Community Day.
Yeah.
For
So,
sure.
Yep, and it's just a good thing to get out there. It does. And the neat thing too is if they need some other hotline, they know all the national hotlines. So let's say talking to should not say operator. I think they call them technical. I don't know. I'm gonna get it wrong, but don't ever call 211. Person answers the phone, an operator. But anyway, whatever the name is, they know all the hotlines. So let's say they think that there's some indications that there's human trafficking going on. They could give that person the human trafficking hotline number. There's also, they would have access to all the domestic violence hotlines and things like that too. So it's a real good source of information, especially if someone doesn't have internet but has a phone. But I will make a note. Who should we connect offline to make sure?
I think I'm on the email with you anyway.
Yeah,
when we were
we're
playing
all
the.
on that email.
Oh, that's right. I think you were all on that email.
Yeah.
So, but I'll let you know how it's going to get up here. The 211 swag. So, any other questions now that I'm up here?
What other swag you got? What else can you bring us?
So I have flyers on the Prosperity Center. So.
Yeah, do it.
Do it. Those would be great to have in the
So
library.
the Seton Center does have some of those already, but we could get some more to the library. We can get some more to the library because we have a new flyer we just made for the home buyer program. So, which is a really great partnership with the county government.
And like things like that where you have a home buyer program, if there's like a couple-hour program to talk about that, we could maybe see if we can schedule. Even if we
Yeah.
can't get the library, maybe
So-
we can use the ambulance corps building. Maybe we can be more.
If this room's
creative
free, we can do it.
about-
Has Mark told you guys about? I'm putting you on the spot, Mark. The June Bloom Housing Festival. Have you?
I have not said anything about
Oh, okay. Well.
Well, come on up.
So in June, there's going to be a second annual housing festival for Frederick County. Fair. Sorry. Thank you, Mark. Second annual housing fair. June Bloom. June Bloom.
What's the date?
It is.
June 1st.
There you
What's it
go. June
called, Mark?
1st. Mark had it better.
Is that a Saturday?
June Bloom Housing Fair, and it's sponsored by the Frederick County Department of Housing and Community Development in conjunction with the Affordable Housing Council,
With the goal of,
to introduce people to anything they need to know about housing and how to acquire housing.
oh, I see.
Now, it's primarily targeted to folks in the Alice category for the most part. I mean, anybody can come, but it's really kind of targeting folks that may need more assistance with housing than the typical well-off person.
Mhm.
And it's going to be at the Arc again.
At the Arc, yes.
Is that subsidizing like home buying? Because we have Richmond here who's trying to sell houses.
It's not
slow
significant.
to get people up here. I mean, is it
that way out of it?
Well, it covers the whole spectrum of programs. United Way has the Home Buying program. The Department of Housing and Community Development also has a home buying program.
And grants.
There's all kinds of nonprofits that have home buying programs or assistance programs. I'm also on the board of Interfaith Housing Alliance, and we create affordable housing and also have a variety of support programs, counseling programs. And there's other there's Habitat, all those groups. So we're bringing all those folks together in one place and having it there for anybody that wants to access those resources. And we have various workshops, and we're giving away prizes. There's a big screen TV we're giving away out here.
Wow.
Where that came from.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Another.
So
and
one
one,
thing you guys could look at is organizing a carpool down there or a van pool.
Yeah.
What date, Mark?
Saturday, June 1st.
Saturday, June 1st.
So,
I think from 10 till 2
Why
or
don't we
book
use-
on that.
I can tell you just a second. I just had it up. Yeah, 10 to 2.
10
It's my
to
favorite.
2. Yeah.
The Arc.
Right next to the keys.
Do you have a flyer on that or something we can put
I
on
don't
our
have it on me.
Emmitsburg Cares or
I'm
something
really
like
failing here.
No, it's all right. I should have brought some myself.
If you email it to me or post it on
Can you
Emmitsburg
email it?
Cares.
I could get it to you, yeah.
Because then we can
there's-
post it on our
Absolutely.
Facebook.
The library should have it, but if they don't, I'll make
Yeah,
it.
they might have it.
These are all things that should be
Give
up
you
on
all
Channel
these
99.
I'm writing it down. I'm trying to keep a list. So, but I wrote it down too, because I think we did get those to the library, but if not, I'll make sure we did. So make sure we did. So, oh, another good thing is to get the word out. Your public schools do have the Find Out First email.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, work with your PTAs and schools. 'Cause each school has its own Find Out First, as well as the school system has
Right, the school
overall
system.
one.
Mm-hmm.
So, just don't forget that as a tool.
This is the elementary school.
Let me find out first email.
Right. Well, that's what I.
Find Out First is a email,
shows up on
texting
the school.
or email
But they
information
have- but
system
They have Find Out First, so that school gets an email out to all
that
the.
broadcasts to everybody.
So, and they already do, but you obviously ask them to include, and they won't do just everything. But you are, as the Citizens Advisory Committee of Emmitsburg, we have a reason to ask.
Do you know, Liz, do you know does that get to see the school parents too?
Find Out First doesn't. You have to sign up for it, and I'm not really sure if you have to have a student in the school.
You do.
You do.
I'm just thinking, you just gotta do everything, right? You
It's
gotta
a,
knock on doors,
yeah.
you gotta do
There's
library.
not one
There's not
way to
one
do.
Lots of
solution.
ways to
You gotta
get
do
the
it.
information.
You gotta do
We
it all.
need to buy a plane that carries our thing around.
Yeah. Well, we're by FEMA. I'm sorry. The air traffic is limited here.
I know, that's
Hot air bill.
No, sorry, FEMA.
Lots of hot air here.
And school closing alerts? Because we still get those, even though we don't have kids in school anymore.
Yeah, we have the same thing.
Okay.
All right.
So action items?
Action items, the action items are, they gotta get a lot of stuff to us.
Yes, we
All
do.
right.
But we need your help. We can't do it all.
Yes, yes.
Work together.
And we will upload, our task will be certainly to find many ways of broadcasting, getting this stuff out so people can be connected.
Can we assign, people to do certain things? Like, I will volunteer to talk with Jubilee about when we could set up a table
Mhm.
at Jubilee. So we probably anticipate that it would take 3 weeks or so to get the flyers and swag and stuff,
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea.
right? I mean, just,
That is
I
one of the
think
greatest ways of getting news out. Everybody goes to
Jubilee.
Jubilee.
right.
Really is.
Well, not everyone.
Well, a lot of people do.
A lot of people do, but
I
anyway,
mean, you don't go there unless you get even for a little tiny thing.
Well, I know some people who don't.
but what I'm saying is, at least in my mind, it helps me if I know I have a specific task to do.
That's right.
So maybe we
Okay.
can come up with some more that people can volunteer for. Just thinking.
Good idea. Yes.
What are you planning for the next meeting? What's
What are
the
we planning?
agenda? Yeah, I mean, we
Well, I
Sort
haven't
of-
collected that information yet, so
sort of
I
jumped
don't
some
know.
hurdles here going through this little piece, but, we had a sort of a large, big picture kind of approach the last time we got together, and there were a lot of problems to address. This was part of it. Circling back to that, what would be the next logical thing that we would look at for the?
Well, I think, we don't need to be broadcasting on Channel 99 at this point, Amy. We could take down the broadcast